Welcome to Whistle Where You Work. I'm Mark Cohen, Executive Director of the Government Accountability Project. So you think the Deepwater Horizon oil disaster is unimaginable? Well, it could be worse, and might yet be, according to BP whistleblower Kenneth Abbott. Abbott isn't even talking about Deepwater Horizon. He's talking about a much bigger BP rig in the Gulf of Mexico that he says is a catastrophe waiting to happen. It's called Atlantis, and it has numerous members of Congress alarmed, along with Winona Howter, Executive Director of Food and Water Watch, and Mandy Smithberger, an investigator for POGO, the Project on Government Oversight. Welcome to Whistle Where You Work. And let's start with you, Winona. Kenneth Abbott, whistleblower, what did he do? How did he come to you? And what is he saying?
Well, about a year ago, Ken and his attorney came to us and asked for help to deal with a very large platform in the Gulf, BP Atlantis, that's at a depth of 7,000 feet. Ken had been a project manager on the platform and had brought to the attention of BP management and Mineral Management Services, the regulatory agency, real problems with safety information. 90% of the documentation that should be available to make sure that the platform operates safely is missing, had been missing when Ken worked there. And he basically was unable to get MMS to react.
So he reported this to MMS?
He reported this to MMS and to BP management. He came to us very frustrated and asked for help bringing this to the attention of members of Congress, which we spent the last year doing. With the recent accident, there's a lot more scrutiny on how BP is operating and on Mineral Management Services, and this is really our opportunity to both shut down Atlantis and to look at how all of the other platforms in deep water are operating.
Well, we now have the experience and know some of the impacts that Deepwater Horizon is having. So the issues here are both economic and environmental, aren't they?
They absolutely are. This will be devastating to the Gulf and, of course, the coastal environment. Who knows how many decades it will take to be able to heal and for the fishing industry to come back, for the beaches to be clean, for all of the wildlife to be able to live again.
All right, so why is Atlantis a bigger threat, potentially, in Kenneth Abbott's mind at least, than Deepwater Horizon?
Well, for one thing, it's a much larger platform. It produces about 8.4 million gallons of oil today, so the spill could be many magnitudes larger. And the safety documentation is really necessary for the operation of the platform. There was internal documents that Ken was privy to, and BP management actually called the situation on Horizon dangerous. They said that it could cause a catastrophic operator accident.
And this is because they weren't current. The information on what to do in case of a spill was not current?
Well, basically, when you build a platform of this nature, you use many, many operators, or contractors rather, to build the platform. And there are supposed to be plans that are approved before they start building it, during construction, and then as built. Because a lot of the plans change and they need to be verified by an engineer. Basically, this is all of the piping, the wellheads, the safety logic systems. And so without those as-built engineer-approved documents, it's very difficult to safely operate the platform. And we suspect that something similar may have happened with Horizon, and that it's probably business as usual in the Gulf.
And what's become of Ken Abbott?
Well, Ken Abbott came forward just last week, and he'll be testifying before Congress, and he is a party to the lawsuit. We have a lawsuit that is asking or demanding that MMS shut down Atlantis until it can be proven safe.
All right, but is Ken still working for BP?
Ken was a contractor, and it had been indicated that he would go full-time, but when he brought these problems to management, his contract wasn't renewed.
I see. So is he filing a whistleblower claim as well?
As a contractor, he's not protected.
How about that?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk a little about the Minerals Management Service, which is part of the Interior Department. Just this week, as we tape this, they've announced some change in the way they're going to handle these sorts of situations. Isn't that right?
That's right. Secretary Salazar announced this week that he's going to split the mission of the Minerals Management Service into 3 missions, which one is going to focus on the safety and regulatory side, one is going to be focused on leasing, and then one is going to be focused on revenue management, particularly looking at royalties, collections, and auditing of that function.
And why would that be? What's the advantage of doing it this way?
The big advantage is that for a long time, MMS has suffered from a conflict of mission, that they've really seen their job as encouraging industry to drill and trying through different kinds of carrots and encouragement to have that occur. And when you need to also hold that industry accountable and conduct oversight with safety and conduct oversight with royalty management, it really undermines that leasing mission. And one of those missions has been valued, which is leasing, and we're seeing now what happens when safety is not one of them.
And so I guess the devil's in the details here. How many resources will be devoted to the oversight as compared to the promotion of new energy sources?
Not only will it be a matter of resources, but making sure that these different bureaus will communicate with each other so that when there is a problem with the lease, that the leasing people will be able to hear the safety regulators. When there's a company that's not paying the royalties that are owed, that will have an impact on their lease.
Okay, well let's talk about the big picture here a little bit. President Obama, when he was running for president, opposed offshore oil drilling altogether. Very shortly before Deepwater Horizon, he announced a change in federal policy and that there was going to be drilling allowed. Since Deepwater Horizon, the president has announced that there will be no new drilling until we figured out why this has happened. Let's assume that the changes that are made at the Minerals Management Service are effective. Will that be sufficient to protect against further incidents like Deepwater Horizon or the greater threat of catastrophe represented by Atlantis?
I think that we can definitely have more assurances. Again, it's going to matter if there are enough resources, if you really have people who have the training that they need to be able to do this effectively. Part of the problem has been that for a while the Minerals Management Service really relied on industry to set regulations and to train these people to do inspections. And if MMS continues to rely on industry to tell them how they should do their job, I think that you can't have real assurances even with this division within MMS.
You know, we're pleased to see these announcements by the administration, but we think they're very insufficient. We need to completely overhaul the way that the oil industry is regulated. The regulations have something like 100 different standards that are basically industry standards that are incorporated into MMS regs that aren't being followed. We need a public process to re-examine how the regulation is being done. It needs to include public hearings around the country, especially in the areas that are where drilling is being done. And then we need to make sure that the law is actually followed, because the cozy relationship where MMS has been a partner and where we've seen a revolving door between industry and the agency.
Something we don't see anywhere else
right.
in the federal government.
But I don't think a division of this nature is going to solve the problem unless we do something a lot more drastic. And we need to begin by looking at the documentation for every deep well platform operating in the Gulf, seeing if their paperwork and safety information is in order. And we haven't heard any discussion of that yet on the Hill or with the Obama administration, which is one of the reasons that we've announced a campaign, spillthetruth.org, and we're running ads in the Gulf to try to put pressure on the Obama administration to take more action.
You know, it seems to me that the shrimping industry should be all over this, that the tourism industry should be all over this, that what's happening, at least from the outside perspective that I have, is that a particular industry, the oil industry, is running roughshod over the economic interests of large portions of the American economy that are being negatively impacted by their activity. But I don't really hear the hue and cry from them that one would expect. Why isn't that?
Well, I think there is a crisis in the Gulf, and that the fishing industry there, we work with a lot of the coastal groups, they're in shock. I think they're very angry, and I think that there will be real demands to do something about the oil industry. But I think we need to have a national movement on this issue, because it's not enough to just have members of Congress in the Gulf. We need to have a lot of attention focused on this issue, certainly before any more drilling is done. And so, you know, I think that we will see more action, but it's going to take a grassroots campaign, a lot more than us calling for this in Washington, D.C.
Well, you know, I sometimes become honestly a bit demoralized when I see the attention span of the public for issues like this. It seems like a month and a half ago everybody was concerned about the state of Haiti, right, and what was going on in Haiti, and it's completely off out of the newspapers, off the TV now. And we have Deepwater Horizon, which is an opportunity to rethink this whole issue. Isn't this the time to do a full push on the Obama administration to say, I had it wrong, no more offshore oil drilling altogether?
Absolutely. I mean, the administration has done too little, too late. Calling for more drilling without making sure that the regulatory apparatus is in place was irresponsible, and they need to really step up to the plate. And we need to have Congress do oversight hearings and begin the overhaul of these regulations.
Mandy?
I think especially what's important with your point about attention span is that this isn't the first time that we've seen awful problems in the Minerals Management Service. We had a sex scandal that happened in 2008, and we learned about the fact that they were doing drugs when industry, and that they were literally in bed with industry, and that we weren't able to sustain that outrage. And we're talking about taxpayers losing potentially billions of dollars because they weren't being effective custodians of our natural resources. So it's unfortunate that it does take a disaster of the scale to focus attention. We also just hope that it's sustained so that real change occurs.
And it's not just at MMS. We need EPA to step up to the plate. We need a real plan of action when there is a spill about what should be done. I mean, why is BP getting to select the dispersant used?
BP is beyond petroleum, right?
Right. So we need a lot of things to be done.
All right. Well, many thanks to Winona Howder of Food and Water Watch and Mandy Smithberger of POGO for alerting us to the Wild West approach to oil exploration and government regulation in the Gulf. I'll be back in a minute.
Thank you. Thank you. I don't know if we're going from the ridiculous to the sublime, as they say, but I've been on the train for 7 hours, so I packed my lunch, and I'm sort of a vegetarian when I can. And so I had this big black plastic bag in my suit and my briefcase, and I was at Penn Station, and I thought I'd change my ticket, see if I can get here faster, because the train was late. And I'm on this long line, and when I get to the ticket office, I said, what did I do at my lunch? And meanwhile, there's pictures of German shepherds all over the place, and it says, Bessie's looking out for you. And on the loudspeaker, it keeps saying, if you see any packages around suspicious, if you see something, say something. And I said, oh my God, there's going to be dogs all over that bag, and it's going to say, I don't smell any meat in here. And I get there, and there's the bag, and it looked ominous, you know, but nobody said anything. Nobody even saw it. Everybody's texting, you know. Everybody's, before you're on your cell phone, you could at least look around. So I don't know where our security is going, but when I tried to get into the Capitol building, I had a carrot, and they said, you can't take that in there. I said, what do you mean? Are you a staff member? I said, no, a staff member could take it in, but I can't. I said, look, I'm licensed to carry firearms. I'm a retired New York City detective, and showed them and thank God some people still use discretion. They didn't take my carrot away. You know, these are indeed troubling times that require us to speak up for our principles. And I thank Tom for this opportunity today to speak, to honor whistleblowers the world over, past, present, and future. Time and again, when I talk to people about corruption, invariably the response I get is, it's human nature. And in so doing, we justify its existence and conveniently absolve ourselves from any further responsibility. I do not believe that corruption or ineptitude are natural functions of the human spirit. However, I do believe that a small group of individuals with egos and greed far greater than the title or office they hold often take advantage of their position to enrich themselves and exploit the very people they are meant to serve. To put it bluntly, positions of leadership and trust often equate a license to steal or otherwise behave unjustly or immorally. Titles themselves do not necessarily assure us, as they should, of the credibility or the integrity of the holder, whether the title be president, CEO, police chief, bishop, justice of the court, etc. Against all these impressive titles, there is or has been documented evidence of improprieties and then some. Unfortunately, because of the power of the office, those that occupy these positions feel they are immune to scrutiny and prosecution, untouchable, too big to fail, too big to go to jail. Some may find this difficult to accept, not wanting to believe that we are vulnerable in the hands of those we trust. But having been on the receiving end of the abuse of power, I am all too familiar with this bitter truth. In the old days, men like Willie Sutton were called bank robbers. Their pictures hung in a post office for stealing from local banks. Today, individuals who defraud us of mega millions have their pictures hanging in boardrooms. For those of you who may be too young to remember, Willie Sutton was a notorious bank robber of the 30s and 40s. I remember the day he was apprehended. I was shining shoes in my father's shoe shop in Brooklyn when I heard the news of his arrest announced on the radio. It is said that when asked why he robbed banks, he answered, "That's where the money is." What protection do subordinates have when they wish to speak out against corruption or other injustices in their workplace? The average hard-working man or woman is not corrupt. The average citizen is too busy trying to make ends meet. Hard-working men and women occupy every sector of industry, government, and the military. They are the eyes and ears of the community, the backbone of the nation. They know what's going on in their place of employment. When they see corruption or ineptitude, many feel compelled to speak out. They want to see conditions corrected, not only because it is fundamentally wrong, but because in the end it hurts them, their families, their communities, and their country. That is why we have whistleblowers, and whistleblowers need protection. I know firsthand that being a whistleblower has grave consequences. For a whistleblower, first and foremost, one thing is certain: retaliation. Retaliation in one form or another, varying in degree and duration. The whistleblower is ostracized, threatened, blacklisted, sent for psychological evaluation, fired, neutralized. This month alone, there has been a bevy of activity around whistleblowers. To mention just a couple, the New England Journal of Medicine released a special report, Whistleblowers' Experiences in Fraud Litigation Against Pharmaceutical Companies. Michael Hudson wrote a two-part investigative series called Silencing the Whistleblowers. How will financial reform prevent another crash if banks subvert the warning system? It seems that when investigative reporters working within big banks tried to warn their superiors of shady practices, the investigators themselves became the targets. You can read the full report on thebigmoney.com. And last but not least, the founder of a whistleblower website, WikiLeaks, had his passport canceled. The reason? It looked worn. The extent and duration of the punishment is limited only by the imagination and viciousness of the wrongdoers and their cohorts. In 1986, when Mordecai Vanunu revealed that Israel had nuclear weapons, he was drugged, kidnapped, tortured, thrown into solitary confinement for 11 years, spending 18 years in prison in all. And to this day, in a civilized society, he is forbidden to leave his own country or speak to foreign nationals. Many of you know Daniel Ellsberg's story. His new documentary, The Most Dangerous Man in America, tells the saga of the Pentagon Papers, Kissinger, and the Vietnam War. Dan will be given tomorrow's closing address. In my case, a number of books have been written, one by the police commissioner himself, attempting to distort the facts and undermine my credibility. In response to a recent New York Times profile on me, almost 40 years later, a retired New York City police sergeant wrote, "Frank, you are a rat. You turned on us, and we will never forget it." I turned on them. Not that they turned on the uniform they wear and the city and the country that they're supposed to serve. Some call whistleblowers heroes. Others will call them traitors. An expert psychiatrist in the case of U.S. versus Anthony Russo and Daniel Ellsberg stated, there are people who in the course of their lives might have possibly sacrificed principle for the sake of career, for the sake of family, and have lived with that compromise, and they will have a lot of disdain, even contempt, for two men who did it for the sake of principle and took the risk. I am pleased to report that I continue to receive positive responses from people all over the world, with an occasional negative one thrown in for good measure. But what happens to individuals who don't have the resources to fight back? Back in the 60s and 70s, even though it was a difficult time for me, I was fortunate that things unfolded as they did. If it were not for all the attention that the New York City Police Department was forced to deal with, thanks in part to the excellent reporting of David Burnham of the New York Times, things may have turned out differently. I have received emails from people in law enforcement, government, the military, industry, the medical profession, and university professors, most of whom just want to share their stories with someone who understands what they're going through. One, a highly decorated Marine sergeant, who said I was his hero. I told him I was proud of what he did with his life after being bounced from one foster home to another. We became close friends, and he confided in me he feared for his life. He came to an untimely death under dubious circumstances. He's buried in Arlington. The pressure brought to bear against whistleblowers and the cost of litigation often resulted in the loss of their livelihoods, their savings, their homes, and the destruction of their family life. Too often, the greatest injustice in a whistleblower's nightmare is as he or she is being retaliated against, the culprit is being rewarded with even greater positions of power. A moral, ethical society requires transparency and accountability in law enforcement, government, and industry. We need whistleblowers. If listened to, whistleblowers can save us money, they can save us embarrassment, they can save us catastrophes, they can save lives. In my opinion, anyone denying adequate whistleblowing protection to our nation's noble and faithful watchdogs on duty 24/7 have ulterior motives and are either corrupt themselves or have something to hide. Our elected officials need to stop this partisan political squabbling and work together for the overall good of the country, as our founding fathers intended. It is my hope that clearer minds will prevail and we can all agree on adequate protection for whistleblowers and get the Whistleblowers Protection Enhancement Act out of Congress and adopted into law. In closing, I would like to comment on the appellation whistleblower. As you know, I prefer the term lamplighter only because the term whistleblower has an unjustly negative connotation in society. I like to imagine the lamplighter's of old whistling a merry tune as they went about their duty lighting the street lamps so that people would not stumble and thieves could not hide in the shadows. Remember, anyone can whistle. So to freedom-loving people of all ages, I say, whistle a merry tune and keep lighting those lamps, for the world will be a far darker place without you. On a lighter note, from time to time I do community theater. I would like to leave you with a few lines from one of my favorite plays, William Saroyan's The Time of Your Life. The year is 1939. The shadow of war looms over the play. In the time of your life, live. Seek goodness everywhere, and when it is found, bring it out of its hiding place, and let it be free and unashamed. Place in matter and in flesh the least of the values, for these are the things that hold death and must pass away. Discover in all things that which shines and is beyond corruption. Encourage virtue in whatever heart it may have been driven into secrecy and sorrow by the shame and terror of the world. Ignore the obvious, for it is unworthy of the clear eye and the kindly heart. Be the inferior of no man, nor of any man be the superior. Remember that every man is a variation of yourself. No man's guilt is not yours, nor is any man's innocence a thing apart. Despise evil and ungodliness, but not men of ungodliness. These understand. In the time of your life, live. So that in that wondrous time, you shall not add to the misery and sorrow of the world, but shall smile to the infinite delight and mystery of it. Thank you.